So again, good morning, everyone. We're going to be doing the Four Quarters chant, or the suffusion with the divine abidings, on page 30 for those who'd like to chant along. Good opportunity to use our imagination that we're not alone in doing the chant. And this is such a beautiful aspiration. I know it's simply aspirational still for most of us, most of the time, but to imagine, this is a good use of imagination, to imagine that we can live our day to day and engage all our friends and all the difficult and all the easy moments of the day with only these four emotions of that basic goodness or friendliness, the quality of compassion, that wisdom that knows how to be close to suffering, very real suffering, without being entangled or oppressed by the suffering. And the quality of appreciative joy. Here in the chant, it's called gladness, or translated as gladness, and equanimity, that powerful balance, even when things are confusing and ambiguous, that capacity, that emotional capacity to be even, engaged, responsive, nimble, even when things are confusing, even when we don't know what should be done. There's this capacity not to lose balance, and we call that generally equanimity, or upekkha is the Pali word. So let's do the chant to begin our time this morning, and then we'll take about 35 minutes. I'll give some meditation instruction during the guided meditation, and then time for reflection together. Now let us make the four boundless qualities shine forth. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with kindness, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with compassion, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with compassion, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with gladness, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with gladness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with equanimity. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with equanimity, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, and without ill will. So we'll take a couple moments and listen to the body. The body is really our gateway back to life, back to the reality, the totality of the present moment. Being intimate with the body is the first step in connecting with others, connecting with the 10,000 joys and sorrows. So this is really important, that we don't imagine that the body is in the way of practice. The pain in the body or the ambiguous sensations in the body. I'd really like just to transcend the body and go right to my practice, or go right to reality. But that's called ignorance. So we begin always such a useful ritual for us human beings who have been conditioned by culture in all sorts of unhelpful ways. It's such a good habit to cultivate this beginning again with the living body here, the living, breathing body alive with the movement of sensation, coming, going, intense and subtle, pleasant, unpleasant. In a very real sense, there's no hope for deeper healing as long as the heart mistrusts the experience of the body. And I'm not saying it's easy to befriend and to include and to relax with the reality of sensation now. I'm just suggesting that it's one of our primary jobs as a human being to learn and relearn and to practice not forgetting, being intimate, being actually interested in the reality of sensation. How's the body feeling? How's the body doing? Such a powerful mirror or teacher in the sense of illuminating, revealing what needs to be felt and seen and understood. And it's nice, it can be helpful to coordinate this with the breath, breathing in this willingness to be open and sensitive to the whole body, breathing out a willingness to allow these sensations to be. And this morning, let's do it part by part. We'll do a body scan, a traditional technique that is useful to have as one of your many ways of coming home to the present moment. Breathing in, saying yes to all the sensations in the head and face to begin with. Exhaling, allowing all these sensations to be. Allowing this awareness to open and soak in a sense, as we feel the scalp, the weight of the hair perhaps, back of the head, ears. Notice if the ears are warm or cool. Feeling the hair touching the forehead and any tension in the brow, in the forehead and temples. Breathing in, receiving the sensations throughout the face, any muscular tension in the jaw, around the eyes. Feeling that ordinary sense of touch as the breath comes in and as the breath goes out. Noticing the moisture in the mouth, the sense of wetness, the tongue, the hardness of the teeth, softness of the lips. So in the most simple and direct way, we're befriending all these sensations, all these qualities in the head and face now. And for this time, we're letting go of everything else so that we can really show up fully to how it is in the face, in the head, how to be a good friend to these sensations here. Curious and open and not tight in any way, not controlling. Sometimes we say giving space for things to be the way they are. And we learn a thing or two about patience as we keep the head, the face, the jaw in mind, the eyes. It's a kind of actual blessing to be present in this way, a healing blessing. And this is true whether we're opening to some community, some group activity, or as we're doing now, just opening to a simple place in the body. So we open now to the throat and the entire neck and down into the tops of the shoulders. So holding or opening and receiving and giving space for all the sensations here to be the way that they are. We're learning to trust the body, in this case, just the throat and the neck and the top of the shoulders. And we're creating space for whatever healing, whatever releasing might happen, but we're not demanding anything. Just being kind as we open and feel what's here to feel. And for these seconds, it's okay to let go of everything else, all the other real issues and problems and concerns, and just show up to the neck, to what's being felt in the throat and the tops of the shoulders. In the same way, if we were comforting a small child that was having a hard time, we probably wouldn't get distracted if it seemed that they really needed our full attention. And when you feel ready, move down from the shoulder joints into both arms and both hands. And let's take our time as we learn to inhabit all these sensations that are in motion, coming and going, including the more subtle ways of pain being held in the arms and hands, any sense of exhaustion that might be felt in the arms and hands, and offering this healing space of awareness, wise and kind awareness, keeping the arms and hands in mind, not forgetting. From the ordinary experience of the touch points, air touching the skin, clothes against the skin, to anything more subtle. And remember, we don't need to demand clarity, just willing to receive the experience as it's presenting itself. And for a moment, the entire head and face, the shoulders and throat and neck, and the arms and hands together. This simple goodness of being present in this way, appreciate that. And we begin to open to the front side of the torso. Let's begin in the upper chest and collarbones. And little by little, just feeling down the front side of the torso. Clothes touching the skin, the movement of the rib cage. Really curious about the solar plexus and the belly and the groin, right down to the pubic bone. Such a good time to practice real curiosity, that willingness to be open and receiving the experience without projecting something onto it. As we open to the front side of the torso in its entirety, knowing that it's alive, it's not a thing as much as an activity being known, being felt. Notice if the belly is hard or soft, defended or released without judgment. And the same around the heart in a more subtle way, if it feels defended or armored, or the heart feels more undefended, exposed, tender. Just noticing without judgment. And opening to the back side of the torso. You can go right through the middle of the torso, from the front side right through the middle, and then open to the back side. The shoulder blades and the back of the ribs expanding and contracting with the easy breath. in the kidneys, and sensing the structure, the supporting structure of the spine, and the living nerves, lower spine, lower back, sits bones, and really appreciating the structure of the pelvis and the floor of the pelvis, perineum, the space between the groin and the anus. Just taking it all in as it is. Again, we don't need to project anything. We're not trying to have a particular experience. We're just learning how to be a good student or how to receive the experience as it actually is now. Feel the hip sockets and the thighs, the big muscles of the thighs, and all the obvious touch points there, however you're sitting now. And the bend of the knees and the sensations there in the knees and the calves and the shins, through the ankle to the base of the heels, sides and tops of the feet, feeling the toes, feeling the sensations at the bottoms of the feet, cool or hot, hard or soft. And we take some time and curious and open to the entire experience of the legs and feet as they actually are. Whole body. Can I trust this opening, this softening, this receiving of the whole body? Nothing is left out. And the aspiration is to allow the body to move, to do its natural dance of life, this movement of sensation, unrestricted. So we're learning how not to project any tightness, any defendedness onto the body, but instead letting the body be nature, a free movement of nature, unrestricted. It doesn't mean it won't hurt. It just means we're learning how to be with the unavoidable pain that arises at times in the body. Do we react to the pain by getting tight, trying to control it? Or do we trust the body to move as sensation? So explore that now in silence for a while. So initially, let's keep it really simple. We're sitting together now, using the support of being here together to practice connecting, being in community with the body in a healthy, healing, and liberating way. How to be with the body in a healing and liberating way right now. So it's okay to be vigilant, to keep returning to this more specific work of connecting with the body as it actually is, and learning how to be wise and kind so that we're relating, we're opening to the body in a way that's helpful, being with the body in a way that's helpful, liberating. And when we get good at this, we open more widely to our lives. The fear and brokenness in our hearts, the hopes, excitements, all that moves in the heart and mind, and how to have a wise and loving, free relationship with all of that. And then out into the wider communities, how to be intimate, how to be engaged in a liberating, wise, and helpful way. But we learn all the important lessons by being with the body. It's really just a metaphor. This body is just a metaphor for all of life, the whole world. Is of course moving, expressing itself in this body right now. All the fear in the world, all the hate, all the goodness, kindness, all of these strands, all these movements are here to be felt and seen. This is where we learn how to be free and wise and kind. Now for the last minute or two, feel free if you'd like to open your eyes without needing to look at anything in particular, but just the open eyes really reminds us that I'm not afraid of engagement. I'm not afraid to inhabit this world of experience, of sensuality, contact. I'm not afraid to be here, to hear, to see, to feel, to think, to relate. And it's a good time at the end of a sit, maybe where we've been able to touch into a little calm. It's a really good time to reflect on refuge. One of the ways of describing what is actually a refuge is this coming together of intimacy and non-attachment. So really being here in the body, in the seeing, in the hearing, in the mental activity, emotional activity, really in a sense owning it, not so much with identification, but giving permission for reality to be what it is right now, in the body, in the heart and mind, externally around us. So being this willingness to be intimate, to feel and see clearly, and for the heart to be unattached or free of attachment, free of controlling, not in conflict with reality. Doesn't mean reality is appropriate. Doesn't mean that things don't need doing. It just means that things are the way that they are right now. So we're going to meet this moment because it's already here. It's already like this. This particular quality of my mind, my heart, my body, the world around me. Are we willing to land, to settle, to grow roots into the moment that we have, which is this moment, right now? Not a moment we imagine from the past or into the future, but this moment as it's presenting itself in the body and the mind, inside, outside. And maybe this profound, liberating way of being, maybe this is our refuge, to remember to do this, to remember that this is a possibility in any moment. So take a little time, stretch the body as you need to so you feel comfortable. You might have noticed, those who have been around, that I'm in a different space. I'm back in the Common Ground building in the teacher office that Shelley Graff and I share. And I was worried about the internet problem we had last week, so I thought I'd just do it here. And some of you may be wondering about when Common Ground is going to reopen. We don't have any plans at this point. We have some longtime community leaders, teachers, board members who are also MDs, and they're advising Gabe and Shelley and me about when might be appropriate to reopen. So we'll, of course, let everybody know when we have some plans. But for now, we'll just stick with taking care of the wider community by doing what we can to reduce the spread of the virus. So some of you probably have been listening to our talks, Shelley on Wednesday and myself on Sunday, and we've been trying to use these practices that many of us have been doing for decades and the teachings of the Buddha more generally, and how it helps us to show up when life is like this. And, one thing that has been coming to my mind is to really be honest with ourselves about what is it about this moment that is so shocking or so different. And to remember that what's really, in a sense, activating us, at least at times, is not so much that something's happening that wasn't happening before, but we know a little bit more about what's always been happening, the kind of injustice or the kind of insecurity. So whether we point to the pandemic or we point to the number of videos that have been, I mean, it's so, I don't know, ironic or what the word is, but that what's coming to light around racism and problems with the criminal justice system is the result of technology. Not so much that we as humans are getting our act together, but it's just the lie or the delusion is just a little bit harder to hold together, and the complacency that comes with that. So I think it's important for us to understand that the world isn't more troubled now. We're just hopefully have a more honest, clear sense of the trouble. And as I was reflecting about the talk today, I came across a poem from a former Common Ground person. Some of you might know Deborah King. Most people know her as Sam King, a well-known poet in town. I think Sam lives out of town now. But this is a poem called Troubled Waters. And I don't have listed where the collection this is part of, but Troubled Waters by Deborah Sam King. And she begins with a quote from the Bible. For an angel went down at a certain time to a pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in, was made whole of whatever disease they had. Didn't know. I mean, I kind of had heard that phrase about troubled waters, but I didn't hear the whole passage, I think, until reading this poem and seeing it quoted there. And I think it really points to some essential truth, not just Buddhist truth, but just this essential human common sense of the relevance of the gritty, troubled nature that is always there, but sometimes humans have the privilege or the set of conditions that allow them to be oblivious to the truth of vulnerability, the truth of injustice, the truth of uncertainty. Unfortunately, the underbelly of life. And I'm not saying that there can't be better times and aren't at times worse times. But life comes with this messy underbelly. And the more we understand how delusion and ignorance and pain and trauma keeps getting transmitted from one generation to the next, and then through cultural programming, we get a better sense of our inheritance as a human being. What energetically in the body and the mental habits that we carry along with us, and then because we're carrying all that along with us unknown, not clearly aware of it, then we tend to plant more of the same seeds. And on and on and on it goes. And of course, the Buddha talked about this in really profound ways, the cycles of suffering, samsara. And it's one of those imponderables, like how it all got set in motion. Where was the beginning of the injustice or the pain? But on and on it goes. So the poem goes like this after that biblical quote. As I sit on the couch exhausted, trying for rest, trying for peace, I'm besieged with fears about my health, my husband's health, the return of our cancers, worried about my son-in-law's job loss, my grandson's allergies, about why our smart, beautiful, loving daughter has not yet found the right mate, about my failed proposals and the bills, how in God's name at times they will be paid, about friends with intractable challenges, and those precious, irreplaceable ones, now forever out of reach. I'm heartsick and outraged about the inaction of Congress. What? Not raise the minimum wage? What? Not lower interest rates on student loans? Not vote for universal health care? Not insist on gun control? Not be more lenient with refugees? About people on lounge chairs with popcorn and drinks cheering missiles aimed at households of children? About fathers who pimp their daughters for gambling money? About whole neighborhoods annihilated by tornadoes, about the disappearance of butterflies, bats, and bees. How powerless I am against all this pain. I want to scream. I want to escape, make it go away. Is it never possible to be truly at ease, to struggle loose from the fray? Maybe, it occurs to me, only if I consent to turbulence, if I allow my barricades against it to disintegrate and stop craving still waters that so quickly become rank. If only I could let those little temples to stasis and safety I try so hard and so unsuccessfully to raise and hide out in, collapse, dissolve, and float downstream. If only I could, in the way of healing waters, let myself be troubled, be like the sea, wide enough, always writhing, wildly alive, and so quick to the wind that, when light strikes, it shatters into hammered gold, into glorious smithereens magnified by the sky, in which the whole broken world could immerse itself. How, then, could it not help but be changed? And I love this because I think it points to this essential truth of our spiritual lives, all of us, regardless, I think, of our location. But there's something about, not that we can always do this, and it's not, it's not about just a direct direct assault on like me opening to my pain or me opening to my humiliation or my, whatever I might be feeling. There is a dance about opening to troubled waters and also realizing the real value in turning away for healing and refreshment so that we can turn back toward the troubled waters. So it isn't just because we're getting clearer about how there is no awakening, there is no skillful engagement in all those little and big places in our lives without learning how to tolerate, as I mentioned, excuse me, last week, to tolerate the intensity, to tolerate the heat of discomfort whenever we're in new territory, whenever we're seeing what we haven't seen before, behind the scenes of our heart, where we've, practiced denial, practiced fixed views so that we wouldn't see the whole picture because maybe we thought unconsciously we didn't have the capacity. But then something happens like new technology and people are taking videotapes of the injustice and racial profiling and all the ways that ancient wounds keep reverberating today, right? Something wakes us up a little. And then then we're in that dance of doing our best to open, see what we're not seeing, actually be curious. But that real curiosity depends on just enough safety. And so how do we learn that we have this capacity to turn away? And what you see, when we look at our own patterns and we look at the patterns of friends and we look at the wider patterns in our community, we tend to see people, because this is what we do, we get stuck. We think there's a way and we just keep using that way. So some of us, sometimes we keep looking at the pain. We keep turning. We're afraid that somehow there's an injustice if we turn away. Like even when we did the body scan meditation during the guided meditation, a little bit ago, it can feel wrong when there's so much moving in our lives and in our wider communities. Like, is it okay for me to turn inward? Is that somehow saying that I don't care? So some of us get fixated that, no, I've got to keep the suffering in mind. But we take it as a fixed view. And that should always raise a red flag. When we take something as a fixed view, it keeps the heart from being nimble and navigating our way to be skillful moment by moment. The other habit would be to somehow have a fixed view that I can't look at it, or I don't need to look at it. It's not my problem. So the various expressions of denial and distraction, where we have an idea that we hold to, the mind holds to, that keeps us from feeling the underbelly that might be there that we haven't been curious about, whether it's about racism or any number of these ancient wounds of ignorance that keep getting replicated in our hearts and in our wider communities, around class, around gender, around sex, around body shape, body size, around every conceivable thing, unfortunately. Because as I mentioned last week, as a creature, we want to be safe. And we've learned a bad habit because it doesn't deliver the safety we actually want, which is the habit of using power to have power over our circumstances, controlling over other people, right? That domination model of power, as opposed to power with, which requires growing roots both in a broad way, seeing the conditional changing nature of our lives, and in a deep, subtle way, right? So we grow roots, we're willing to participate, we're willing to be part of the activity of nature, as opposed to separating ourselves out. I have dominion over this wild thing I call nature, whether it's, my partner, I have power, control over them, or my physical circumstances, or these ancient community problems like racism. I've got an idea that allows me to feel like I have dominion. Because I think I understand. I have, I've assigned blame. However, I've assigned blame, and that makes me feel somewhat secure. So we want to be aware of these two ways of avoiding and getting fixated, avoiding the suffering and getting fixated on the suffering, and learn instead to navigate and to use that full range, because there are times to drop everything and disappear, whether it means going to bed at night and having a good night's sleep where we're not tormented by all the injustice and suffering that is happening all around us, right? It doesn't help us be a better human being if we can't sleep. So even in that simple way of being able to sleep at night or laugh with a friend or see a silly movie is useful. It doesn't mean we forget this. It means that we're purposefully doing our meditation practice, purposefully taking a nice bath, a nice walk in a park, so that we can live our life more fully, more open, less defended, more skillfully participating in what's happening around us. I like in this poem where Sam talks about, I allow my barricades against it to disintegrate and stop craving still waters that become still waters that so quickly become rank, right? Because when I need the stillness, like when I'm dependent on being disconnected, being in my sort of like when calmness becomes a shadow, where I cling to the idea of being calm and equanimous, that then it gets stinky. It's not helpful. Just in the same way, if I cling to being an activist and somebody who's going to fix the world or can't stand the way things are, if I cling to that, then it gets stinky. And this is hard. It's really difficult territory for us to learn how to be in the moment, because in the moment, by definition, is not depending on a stance. Because to be in the moment, both in that sense of breadth and depth, it's like the mind has to let go of solid ground, because we're really taking, we're aligning with sensitivity so that our response comes out of what we're sensitive to. And you can try this, ideally you build confidence in places that are less intense. It's like maybe for some, one of the less scary, less intense places would be just being in a really sweet spot, around some big trees or nice lake or a group of friends. And then just practice not clinging to the niceness of the situation, but just growing roots into it, really letting the refreshment come not from trying to depend on the niceness of the situation, but knowing that it won't always be this way, so that we really want to let it have its impact, like really let it in. And then when conditions inevitably change, then that whatever kind of healing came, whatever refreshment, whatever that allowing the pleasantness in, the mind was able to shed some layers of armor and defensiveness and shed a little bit of that habit of needing to control. And then we bring that into whatever the next situation is that won't be so ideal, won't be so pleasant. And we really want to remember that we need a sense of safety. We have to find a wholesome sense of safety when we decide we are going to do the difficult work of moving into our pain and the world's pain. I read these verses from the Buddhist teachings last week. I'll just reread some of this. Fear is born from arming oneself. Just see how many people fight. I tell you about the dreadful fear that caused me to shake all over. It's kind of poignant to imagine the Buddha shaking all over, seeing creatures flopping around like fish in water too shallow, so hostile to one another. Well, this is a little bit of, not always, but in some corners and sometimes on the front stage in our own culture, like fish flopping around in water too shallow. That's how everybody seems reacting to each other. Seeing this, I became afraid. So what do we need? What supports do we need to be able to see the world, whether it's the wider world or specific places in the world, like the criminal justice system or the environmental crisis, or what's been neglected in our own families, in our own homes? What supports do I need to be able to show up in a clear way, in a fearless way, so that my engagement isn't arising because I have to engage, because I'm afraid to feel. And any disengagement isn't arising because I'm afraid to engage. We really want that, the amount of supports and safety and clarity, so that engagement flows naturally from the sensitivity, not from a neurotic need to engage, nor a neurotic need to stay away from engagement. In a way, we're saying, like, I want to be nature. I want my activity, my engagement to be nature, but nature, this natural activity of speech, of action, right? I want that activity to arise as best as possible from the entirety of the moment, from being a sensitive, curious. Now, we all have our biases, of course, so that means in that sensitivity, we're aware of how we tend to see things. We're aware of the programming we've received, like in my case as a white person, right? If I'm not aware of those biases that got picked up through cultural conditioning, then if I'm there thinking, okay, I'm really aware, I'm really sensitive, I don't need to engage, I don't need not to engage, but I'm not seeing how the sensitivity is being colored by my cultural conditioning. So that, like, that unpacking, like learning how to be present. And last week I talked a lot about humility. Learning that capacity to be present requires that we have the stability to do the work of unpacking, because it's not pleasant. And the Buddha goes there. He says, this world completely lacks essence. It trembles in all directions. I long to find myself a place unscathed, but I could not see it. Right? So as we unpack, as we emphasize sensitivity instead of solid ground, being present, wise and kind and present, instead of that fixed stance, well, we're going to notice some serious pushback of that exposure, that lack of ground. The world will tremble in all directions. So we begin by kind of looking at things that we haven't seen in a more psychological, social level. And then we get to this deeper existential level about the absence of ground. And the sense of a me, a solid me, self, thinking it needs solid ground, that's the basic premise we've been acting out of for a long, long time. So this work of showing up in our families, showing up in our communities, it really leads to this deepest spiritual work. And the more we do our work on our own psychological, emotional level, our own socialization level, and all the biases that get programmed in through culture, again, around race, around sex and gender, class, and all these ways that we've been programmed. And then even deeper, around the sense of being as somebody who needs solidity and ground, and learning to inhabit a much more open and undefined space of that sensitivity and that more nimble response to what the sensitive heart is sensitive to. And we're basically learning how to be nature. That nature, that expression or that movement of nature that arises out of being connected or intimate. And that's why I like that refuge of intimacy, the marriage of intimacy and non-attachment. That we need the intimacy with our world, our messy, wounded, unjust world, right? The beauty of it and the horror of it. We need intimacy because it is the non-fear, non-fear, and that not fearing engagement and not fearing leaving things alone when that's the appropriate response. That non-fear is really the active expression of liberation. Right? That's what freedom, liberation looks like. It's that that engagement without the tightness of fear, without the agenda. So even if the situation is hopeless, I can imagine more, at least, I mean, not fully yet, of course, but I can imagine even when a situation appears to me to be hopeless, that there could be a lot of lightness in the engagement, a lot of nimbleness, a lot of willingness to do what can be done to alleviate suffering, even if things are going to get worse because of all the other forces involved. And then this passage that I read last week, it ends again. Seeing people locked in conflict, I became completely distraught. But then I discerned here a thorn, hard to see, lodged deep in the heart. It's only when pierced by this thorn that one runs in all directions. So if that thorn is taken out, one does not run and settles down. And each of us, I mean, I can say some words, the Buddha certainly said some words, but each of us has to actually find that thorn lodged deep in our heart, which is basically has the flavor of somebody, something needs solid ground. It's the most subtle and persistent programmed sense to not trust life, not trust engagement and participation in this whole uninhibited way. And this is really important to get because, again, there's so many shadows everywhere, misunderstandings. And in Buddhist practice, it can feel like this I'm retreating from life because life is so messy, because there isn't ground. I need to retreat. And the sitting practice, formal meditation practice, and going on a Buddhist retreat, it can really seem like, oh, yeah, this is the way. Disappearing, leaving behind the mess. But that's that dance that I mentioned before. There's no moving in a way that's actually helpful for ourselves and others unless the mind has some stability so that it can learn. But if I'm just frozen around a fixed view, and that's really where my participation is coming from, what are the seeds that I'm actually planting in my own heart and in those around me, right? Well, I'm basically reinforcing the tendency to be afraid, to be controlling, that having power over, as opposed to having power with. How do we participate? Like we're never going to have control over nature, but we are nature. So as nature, we get to participate with this dance of nature, but we never get to control it. We get to participate. So then the question is like, if I'm going to participate, I really need to know what I'm participating with. And you see, it just naturally emphasizes the need for that wise and kind continuity of awareness, that both the breadth and the subtlety of awareness, really growing roots. And so less emphasis on I have to respond or I shouldn't respond, just giving that over to the sensitivity. Like I trust that by emphasizing the capacity to feel and see, again, this requirement of humility, then how I show up with my partner, with my kids, with my community around these places of injustice and require change that we need here in our country and just generally everywhere, how we move in directions that are healing, I trust that that will arise because of the hard work of being present. And we have to gain confidence in this. It's not enough for somebody to tell us this is the way, right? Obviously, that doesn't work. And even my particular location as a white man, kind of sitting here saying this is what the Buddha said. But the key is to realize with humility how so many of the programmed ways we have to respond to the issues in our lives haven't been that helpful. And some of the ways we respond have been counterproductive, where we've caused more problems, planted the same seeds we were hoping to uproot. So then we get curious, does someone else have anything to say about this? And if we're lucky, we bump into some wise teachings. And then if we have some integrity, we check them out and see, like, does it actually help? So that's what I'm encouraging all of us, myself included, to do, to check out, okay, well, let me try this dance of using, when it's available, using the sitting practice, deep sleep, healing activities where I touch into some safety as a means to explore those edges where I don't feel so safe. But I take what those moments of safety, what did they teach us? Maybe it's okay to relax. Maybe it's okay to be a little less defended, a little less fixed with my ideas of right and wrong, so that I can be a little bit more open, so that I can see what I'm not seeing and feel what I'm not feeling. So we take that understanding into the edges where things are hot and difficult, and the mind doesn't have a lot of competence or clarity. And we discover, perhaps, this is for us to discover, that how the heart, body, mind is relating seems to be more functional, more useful, leading in directions that are healing, not part of the problem so much anymore. And that gives us competence to really do this dance of getting better at finding places of refreshment, developing our sitting practice, going away to places that are healing for us, that allow the body and the heart and mind to put down defenses, to put down fear. So we remember what it's like not to be afraid and not to be activated. We need to remember that. And our friends need to remind us, Mark, maybe you seem activated. You seem like you're running on greed, anger, and delusion. Maybe you need you need a reset. What could you do? We need to sort of mirror that back, so that when I go back to my edges, there's that little glimmer of insight that basically mistrusts the need for suffering, mistrusts the need for my heart to be hard and defended. And that's the thing, when we're confused and we're just activated and engaged in our lives in different ways, that part of the habit is justifying being tight. Like, this situation demands that I'm tight, demands that I'm afraid, demands that I have hate. And it seems to make sense in that bubble, that oh yeah, there's no way other than this way. Now, I'm not saying that things can't be strong and loud, but it doesn't have to come from hate and fear. Love, compassion, can be as fierce and strong as the situation requires, right? Because that's basically the definition of compassionate action. It's that force, that movement of nature that is meeting the moment in a skillful, functional way, right? So if it requires a loud voice or power, then compassion, the wisdom of compassion, gets the power it needs, raises its voice in a way that the moment needs. But it's not a dependency. So this is the great predicament that we're in, and whatever habits we've had at avoiding these kind of sticky areas, it doesn't work. Certainly doesn't work in the long run. So that would be a good thing for us, just each individually, to map out for ourselves, like, where are the edges where I'm uncertain, where stuff comes up for me, I feel uncomfortable, where I feel drawn, but I don't know what I'm doing, I feel incompetent, the world seems to be asking for my engagement. Where are those places? And where are the places where I can remember to put down the load, and I can remember what it's like for the heart to be relatively undefended and open and curious and alive. So that refreshment, then, I bring those qualities that the safety, the particular conditions allow for, I bring that into the sticky, difficult places. And then when it's too much, when I find myself operating on habit alone, not nimble, using greed, anger, and hatred, denial or distraction or fixed view, when I see that it's not helping and the seeds I'm planting aren't really contributing, then I turn away as best I can. Not always, it's not always so easy to step out of the fire, right? But we realize I'm not helping. And then we go home and we take a bath, or we cook a nice meal, or we get a good night's sleep, and we do our meditation, and we develop that skill in meditation that is all about putting everything down. But it's not just the only move, putting everything down. It's putting everything down so that when we pick everything back up, we're picking up the world and all of its cries with a different heart and mind. Mind and heart that's remembering the possibility of lightness, having a natural distrust of hardness and hate and fear. Let me end with this poem by Mary Oliver. And again, she's just using, as some of you know with Mary Oliver's poetry, just uses nature as a metaphor so often. And I think this is in her book, Dreamworks, the collection Dreamworks. And the poem is Shadows. Everyone knows the great energies running amok cast terrible shadows, that each of the so-called senseless acts has its thread looping back through the world and into a human heart. Meanwhile, the gold-trimmed thunder wanders the sky. The river may be filling the cellars of the sleeping town. Cyclone, fire, and their merry cousins bring us to grief. But these are the hours with the old wooden god faces. We lift them to our shoulders like so many black coffins. We continue walking into the future. I don't mean there are no bodies in the river or bones broken by the wind. I mean everyone who has heard the lethal train roar of the tornado swears there is no mention ever of any person or reason. I mean the waters rise without any plot upon history or even geography. Whatever power of the earth rampages, we turn to it dazed, we turn to it dazed but anonymous eyes. Whatever the name of the catastrophe, it is never the opposite of love. And I like that because it's such an invitation to meet these difficulties, these messy, broken places in our hearts, in our world, with that sense of being open, not defining it as evil or bad, but how to show up, how to respond, how to plant some good seeds, how to become the kind of person that leaves behind healing instead of replicating cycles of suffering. This is the dance I'm interested in. Really nice to be with everybody today. Remember, Wynn and I have been doing a practice check-in. There's really not time in the way we do these Sunday morning talks for discussion, but if you're free on Tuesday at 12 noon Central Time, please join us. There's a guided sit for 30 minutes and then a time for discussion and questions. And you're welcome to send those questions in earlier to the info@commongroundmeditation.org, and Gabe will get them to Wynn and me.